The morning fog still veiled the pine-lined roads of Redwood Falls as Ben Carter navigated his bus onto Hillridge Pass, the final leg of the route before Redwood Elementary. The diesel engine produced a consistent hum. The soft murmur of children's voices filled the interior, and the brilliant gold and orange of the autumn leaves streamed past the windows. Everything about that Tuesday presented itself as perfectly ordinary, until the moment it wasn't. Ben's gaze sharpened as two shapes materialized out of the mist ahead. They weren't people. They were dogs, large, powerfully built, and unervingly focused. The pair of German shepherds were positioned directly in the path of Bus 12. They both had on official K-9 vests, their posture rigid, and their eyes fixed on the bus as if challenging it to advance. One of the dogs, whose coat was darker and had a white patch on its paw, moved a step forward and emitted a low, throaty growl. Ben applied the brakes firmly. Inside the bus, the children lurched slightly, their chatter momentarily ceasing. For a brief instant, there was nothing but quiet. Rex and Max, the county's most distinguished K-9s, had no reason to be here. Their presence wasn't on any schedule. Their handler was nowhere in sight, and yet they stood there, motionless and resolute, obstructing the road like sentinels guarding something no one could yet comprehend. Ben's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. Something was off. Ben Carter had driven this exact route for more than a decade. Through rain, snow, fog, or the smoke of fire season, nothing had ever forced him to a sudden stop on Hillridge Pass until this moment. He peered through the windshield, struggling to comprehend the scene before him. The dogs remained stationary. Rex stood slightly in front, his chest puffed out and ears alert. Max stayed at his side, his gaze never wavering from the bus's undercarriage. Their stance was neither hostile nor docile. It was deliberate and full of purpose. Ben let out a slow breath, his hand moving automatically toward the radio before he paused. What, precisely, would he say? "Two dogs are refusing to get out of the road," sounded preposterous. Except these weren't just any dogs, they were Rex and Max. Everyone in Cascade County recognized their names. "Why are we stopped?" a quiet voice inquired from the third row. Emily Whitaker, a studious and observant 10-year-old, had made her way closer to the front. She wasn't fearful, not yet, simply inquisitive. "Looks like we have a couple of police dogs in our way," Ben answered with forced calmness, managing a faint smile. They must be a little lost. But he didn't believe his own words for a second. He gave a light tap on the horn. Rex flinched but held his ground. Max reacted with a soft growl, then came forward and deliberately raked his claws against the front of the bus. The noise of claws scraping metal resounded in the quiet. A wave of nervousness rippled through the bus. Children started leaning toward the windows, their whispers filling the air. One took out a phone. Another shouted, "Hey, isn't that Rex? From the demo last week." Ben's heart skipped a beat. The demo. That was it. They had both been part of the school's K-9 unit demonstration just last Friday. And here they were again, alone, blocking his bus. Something was profoundly, deeply wrong. In a matter of minutes, the situation on Hillridge Pass had shifted from peculiar to bizarre. Emily had already phoned her mother, Principal Dana Whitaker, who showed up moments later in her dusty blue SUV. Her heels rapped against the asphalt as she hurried to the front of the bus, her gaze immediately fixing on the 2K9s in the road. Behind her, Sheriff Paul Harris arrived, his siren silent but lights strobing. He exited his vehicle, his jaw set, his hand resting instinctively on the handle of his holstered radio. "Ben," Dana called out, her eyes taking in the standoff. "Are those? They're Rex and Max," Ben confirmed grimly, stepping down from the bus. "And they aren't moving." Sheriff Harris neared cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he identified the animals. "Where is their handler?" "Not around," Ben stated. "No leash, no car, nothing." Rex uttered a single, sharp bark before returning to his post, planted firmly before the bumper. Max paid the adults no mind. His focus remained laser-sharp on the area beneath the bus. "Something's not right," Harris murmured. "These two are professionals. If they're out here on their own, behaving this way, they aren't lost. They're alerting." Dana's eyes grew wide. "You think they're detecting something?" The sheriff didn't reply right away. Instead, he took a step back and spoke into his radio. "This is Sheriff Harris. I require bomb squad dispatch to my location immediately. Possible threat concerning school bus number 12, Hillridge Pass. Initiate a perimeter lockdown. Ben glanced back at the bus, where over 20 children were now wide-eyed and fully attentive, their faces pressed against the windows. Emily remained at the door, observing the entire scene unfold. "Do you want me to evacuate?" Ben inquired. "Not just yet," Sheriff Harris answered, his gaze fixed on the dogs. "Not until we have a clear idea of what they're attempting to show us." The atmosphere tensed. Sheriff Harris's voice, low yet firm, came over the radio, his words delivered with crisp authority. Within moments, more units from Cascade County started to show up. Marked patrol cars, unmarked SUVs, and even a fire engine that was in the vicinity. "Establish a perimeter at both ends of the road," he directed, gesturing to the arriving officers. "Keep everyone away. Nobody gets close to that bus." Ben moved out of the way as the law enforcement officers sprang into action, but his attention never strayed from the two dogs. Rex was still positioned squarely in the center, his shoulders set like a soldier on watch. Max had moved to the side of the bus and was now seated, though he remained vigilant, his eyes narrowed and nostrils twitching. Something under that vehicle had their undivided attention. "Get the children out," Dana said softly, now standing next to Ben. Her voice was composed, but her fingers shook slightly at her sides. "Understood," he agreed, reboarding the bus. The instant he did, every child looked to him, their faces filled with unasked questions. "Okay, everybody," Ben said in a gentle tone. "We're going to have a brief safety drill, just as we've practiced. Leave your belongings, remain calm, and we'll walk together to the other side of the field." The children complied without pushing or panicking, only with a quiet sense of confusion. Outside, officers led the students over the open grass to the outer fence near the community soccer field. Dana held Emily's hand as they walked, throwing one final look at the dogs and the bus. Ben was the last one off. As he descended the steps, Rex looked at him, then turned his head sharply back toward the underside of the bus, as if to communicate, "We've got this, but stay away from that vehicle." The grassy field was transformed into a temporary safe area. Children clustered together, some holding hands, others stretching their necks to see the events taking place by the road. Parents began to show up, having been notified by a flurry of texts and phone calls. The majority remained at the perimeter, anxious and quiet, awaiting information that no one yet possessed. Near the bus, the tension mounted quickly. Two state troopers came with a small bomb disposal unit, deploying a tracked robot from the rear of their armored van. The machine, with its blinking lights and silent wheels, advanced toward Bus 12 via remote control, its camera lens rotating and its mechanical arm extending forward. Ben stood with Sheriff Harris, his arms folded tightly across his chest, his jaw clenched. "See anything?" he asked. "Nothing visible," the sheriff answered. "But those dogs aren't just making a guess. They're trained to find threats, explosives, accelerants, electronics." As if responding to a cue, Max got to his feet and started to pace along the side of the bus, his head held low and his nose near the ground. He stopped by the rear wheel well and gave a single, sharp, and deliberate bark. Rex followed his lead, moving to the opposite side. Then he started to scratch at the metal, the sound jarring in the increasing quiet. It wasn't a random act. It was focused, as though he knew precisely where the threat was located. Dana Whitaker was with a small group of teachers, her arms protectively around Emily, whose face was pale but collected. "Why would they show up here?" she murmured, mostly to herself. "How did they even escape their kennel?" The robot got to the back of the bus and stopped. One of the troopers spoke into his headset. A moment later, he looked at Harris. "We have something," he stated. "There's a device. Underside, rear axle. It's mounted with magnets and appears sophisticated." No one said a word for a moment. Time seemed to halt. Then, Sheriff Harris issued the command, "Expand the perimeter." Nobody within 300 feet. A profound sense of dread washed over the crowd. What began with two dogs in the road had become a full-blown bomb threat, and the sole reason anyone was aware was because Rex and Max had refused to yield. The bomb technicians operated in a tight unit, their communication consisting of short phrases, every action practiced and precise. Their protective gear shimmered in the morning light, making them resemble astronauts more than police officers. From the mobile command post, Lieutenant Grace Molina watched the robot's camera feed, her gaze moving between multiple screens. The device was authentic, or at least it appeared to be. Fastened by magnets to the bus's undercarriage, it was about the size of a shoebox, with a black case, visible wires, and a flashing red light. A faint but consistent hum was picked up by the robot's microphone. "Could be a fake," Melina said under her breath. "But I don't like the look of that casing. It's too well-made, too professional." Sheriff Harris stood next to her, his hands on his hips. "And if it's not a fake? Then we're incredibly fortunate those dogs were on the road," she replied, her eyes still glued to the monitor. Ben, who was now further back with Dana and several other parents, observed with a heavy feeling in his chest. "They called it a drill last week," he mumbled. "That Rex and Max were just demonstrating their abilities." But they weren't just demonstrating, were they? They were learning. Out on the field, Max stood stiffly, his eyes locked on the bus. Rex stayed seated, ears pointed forward, muscles coiled. Neither dog barked or moved, but their message was unmistakable. Do not believe what you see. Something is not as it seems. Finally, the robot's mechanical arm reached out and carefully detached a panel from the device. There was no blast, no trigger. Tucked inside among the wiring was something unforeseen, a flash drive. No explosive material, no detonator, just circuits, wires, and a message waiting to be seen. Melina looked at Harris. "Sir, this might not be what we expected." The flash drive was hurried to the mobile command post, where a protected laptop was ready under a shaded awning. Lieutenant Molina, wearing gloves, inserted the drive as Sheriff Harris, Principal Dana Whitaker, and Ben Carter gathered to watch. A single video file was on the drive. Molina double-clicked it. The screen came alive, showing a man in his 60s sitting at a messy workbench. His name was displayed at the bottom in simple white letters. Harold Kelly, former chief mechanic, Redwood Falls School District. "By the time you see this," he started, his voice rough but composed, "you've likely discovered the device we put under Bus 12. I need to be perfectly clear, it is not a bomb. It was never meant to harm anybody." The camera zoomed out a bit, revealing a younger man next to him, who looked agitated, wringing his hands. "I'm Mason Kelly," he stated. "I assisted in designing the device. We constructed it together." Harold went on, 18 months ago, during a standard inspection, I discovered structural fractures on multiple district buses, including Bus 12. There were stress cracks in the chassis frame, very close to the fuel tank. I noted everything, performed tests, and submitted detailed reports." His face grew stern. But the district refused to listen. They claimed I was overstating the problem to secure more funding. They fired me, calling me unstable. Mason continued the story. "Last month, we learned of a close call in a nearby county. A bus with the identical structural issue nearly had a brake failure going downhill with a full load of children. The incident was swept under the rug." Harold nodded grimly. "That's when we realized we couldn't delay any longer. We built the device to seem threatening, just threatening enough to trigger an investigation. It contains no explosives, only circuitry, a live GPS tracker, and this message." He stopped, looking directly at the camera. "We were installing the device late one night last week, right after the K9 demonstration at the school. We were unaware the dogs were close by until they began to bark. Something, perhaps the adhesive we used, alerted them." Mason added, almost in disbelief, "They must have recalled the smell and followed the bus on their own." The screen went black. There was no signature, no appeal for mercy, only the facts, and two dogs who had sensed the truth before any human. The video's contents sent shockwaves through Redwood Falls. Within hours, district authorities verified the information in Harold Kelly's claims. A group of outside inspectors was hired right away to evaluate the state of every bus in the fleet. Bus 12, Ben's bus, was confirmed to have the exact issue Harold had detailed: stress fractures near the fuel tank, concealed by years of grime and routine inspection oversights. 3 additional buses exhibited early indications of the same defect. The school board released a statement expressing profound concern and authorized emergency replacements. Lisa Monroe, the district's director of transportation, tendered her resignation quietly the following day. However, beyond the resignations and urgent inspections, it was the community's sense of trust that underwent the most significant change. Most residents couldn't cease discussing Rex and Max. How had they sensed it? How had they managed to escape their kennel and locate the precise bus at the exact moment it had to be stopped? They shouldn't have been able to escape, stated Sergeant Tom Given, their K-9 handler. The crates were locked, the compound secured. But they escaped, and they headed straight there. I have no explanation for it. Maybe nobody does. The sheriff decided not to file charges against Harold or Mason Kelly. Instead, they were assigned to supervise community service and requested to help with the new inspection efforts. Public sentiment was divided. Some labeled them irresponsible, while others saw them as heroes. Yet, nearly everyone concurred on a single point. If it weren't for that device, and for the dogs who would not ignore it, Redwood Falls could have faced a preventable catastrophe. At a special assembly at the school the next week, Principal Dana Whitaker walked to the podium, with Rex and Max sitting proudly at her side, both sporting honorary badges on their collars. "These dogs did more than just stop a bus," she declared, her voice slightly shaky. "They prevented a tragedy. They perceived what no one else could, and they responded without orders, without a moment's hesitation." The gymnasium filled with thunderous applause. In the audience, Ben Carter clapped as well, more subdued than the others, but with a depth of gratitude that words could not express. The following day, Redwood Falls seemed more peaceful than usual. A mist clung to the trees as Ben Carter pulled his brand-new school bus into its assigned spot at the depot. It shone in the morning sun, its paint unmarred, its engine quiet but reliable. He lingered beside it for a considerable time, one hand placed on the cool metal near the front bumper, at the very spot where Rex had stood, where everything had changed. Later that day, as children darted across the school grounds, Rex and Max rested beneath a maple tree near the school's entrance, their badges reflecting the sunlight. A few second graders lined up to pet them, while Max gently sniffed a lunchbox and wagged his tail in what seemed like approval. Ben came over quietly and knelt beside them. "I'm not sure what you saw," he said, his voice gentle, "but you saw it long before any of us did. You weren't barking for notice. You weren't waiting for an order. You just took action." Max nudged his hand. Rex merely looked at him with eyes that appeared to comprehend. Sometimes, Ben reflected, heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes, they don't even speak. They simply appear. They hold their ground. They offer protection. And sometimes, that is all that is required to alter everything. As he stood up and headed back toward the school, the sounds of learning and laughter once again filled the air. Life in Redwood Falls carried on, but the image of two silent protectors, standing firm in the middle of a road and refusing to let danger go by, would endure forever.